Alrighty, welcome back. Where did we leave off? Really? Really no search function? Oh. All right. Back up a paragraph. Hope Hicks told the select committee how that press conference was received in the White House. The day after the press conference, President Trump spoke by phone with Sidney Powell from the Oval Office. During the call, Powell repeated the same claims of foreign interference in the election she had made at the press conference. While she was speaking, the president muted his speakerphone and laughed at Powell, telling the others in the room, "This does sound crazy, doesn't it?" A few days later, the Trump campaign issued a statement claiming Powell was not part of the Trump campaign's legal team. But Powell's outlandish claims were no different from those President Trump was making himself. On November 19th, the same day as Powell's appearance at the RNC, President Trump tweeted and retweeted a link to a segment on One American News Network that was captioned, "Dominionizing the Vote." Okay. The segment claimed that Dominion had switched votes from Trump to Biden. OANN featured a supposed cyber expert, Ron Watkins, as a key figure in the QAnon conspiracy movement. Ron Watkins. On his own Twitter account, Watkins celebrated and thanked his supporters just minutes after President Trump tweeted the clip, and President Trump went on to share the clip again several times in the days that followed. Officials inside the Trump administration continued to debunk the Dominion conspiracy theory, including during in-person meetings with President Trump. Attorney General Bill Barr met with the president face-to-face on 3 occasions after the election. Barr told the Select Committee, "Every time I was with the president, I raised the machines as sort of an Exhibit A of how irresponsible this was." During the first of these meetings on November 23rd, Barr explained to the president that the conspiracy theory about Dominion's voting machines had zero basis and was one of the most disturbing allegations. Barr stressed that this was very crazy stuff and was poisoning Americans' confidence in the voting system for no reason. This complete nonsense was doing a great disservice to the country, Bill Barr said. President Trump ignored Barr's grave concerns. On November 29th, hold on. My mic was falling down. On November 29th, President Trump was interviewed by Fox News' Maria Bartiromo. November 29th. November 29th, President Trump was interviewed by Fox News' Maria Bartiromo. It was the president's first interview since he lost his bid for re-election. He claimed the election was rigged and rife with theft and a total fraud. He repeated various conspiracy theories, leading with the claim that Dominion's voting machines had glitches, which he alleged moved thousands of votes from my account to Biden's account. He claimed that there had been big, massive dumps of votes, a reference to the Red Mirage. He rambled off various other spurious allegations, including that dead people voted in significant numbers. None of it was true. On December 1st, Attorney General Barr met again with President Trump and told him that the stuff his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. Attorney General Barr specifically told President Trump that the claims about Dominion voting machines were idiotic claims. Trump was still not dissuaded from continuing the lie. The day after his meeting with the Attorney General, President Trump released a video in which he repeated several claims of election fraud, including a claim that votes had been wrongly switched from Trump to Biden using Dominion voting machines. Through December, President Trump and his legal team tried to echo. By early December, courts had assessed and rejected claims that Dominion machines were manipulated to affect the outcome of the 2020 election. In Michigan, a federal judge found that claims, including those related to fraud due to the use of Dominion voting machines, were based on nothing but speculation and conjecture that votes were destroyed, discarded, or switched. In Arizona, a federal judge dismissed claims that Dominion machines had deleted, switched, or changed votes. President Trump and his supporters refused to accept denunciations of the fabricated Dominion claims. Through December, President Trump and his legal team tried to echo the Dominion conspiracy theory by claiming to have found evidence that votes were switched in Antrim County. The clerk's unintentional error was fixed weeks earlier, and there was no evidence showing that Dominion had altered the vote tally in Antrim or anywhere else. But President Trump's legal team used a case challenging a local marijuana ordinance that had passed by one vote to gain access to Dominion's voting machines. An Antrim County judge issued an order granting the plaintiff's experts access to the county's computer, Dominion voting machines, thumb drives, and memory cards. Although the purpose of the order was to allow the plaintiff to seek evidence related to his ordinance challenge, it soon became clear that President Trump's legal team was behind the effort. Wow. The An organization named Allied Security Operations Group, led by Russell Ramsland, conducted an analysis of Antrim County's voting machines and related systems. On December 13th, ASOG released a report on its findings. The inspection yielded no evidence of vote manipulation. Still, the report included an unsubstantiated assertion that the Dominion voting machines used in Antrim County and throughout Michigan were purposefully designed with inherent error to create systemic fraud and influence election results, and that a malicious algorithm was used to manipulate the results of the 2020 election. Stand by. Documents obtained by the Select Committee show that President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence were briefed on ASOG's findings by Giuliani's team. On December 14th, President Trump widely disseminated the ASOG report and accompanying talking points prepared by Giuliani's team. He also trumpeted the report on Twitter, writing on December 14th, "Wow, this report shows massive fraud. Election-changing result." During a meeting with Attorney General Bill Barr later that day, President Trump claimed the ASOG report was absolute proof that the Dominion machines were rigged, and meant he was going to have a second term. Bill Barr told the Select Committee that he believed the ASOG report was very amateurish, its authors lacked any real qualifications, and it failed to provide supporting information for its sweeping conclusions about Dominion. Barr told President Trump that he would look into the report, but that the DOJ had already had a good idea of what happened in Antrim County and it was human error, not a problem with the machines. In any event, Barr promised President Trump they would have a definitive answer within a couple of days because a hand recount was being conducted. In the ensuing days, as Barr predicted, the ASOG report was swiftly and soundly criticized by experts within and outside the Trump administration, including the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. The initial analysis of election security experts at the Department of Homeland Security was that the ASOG report was false and misleading and demonstrates a callous misunderstanding of the actual current voting certification process. Subsequent analyses of the ASOG report and the underlying data from Antrim County were even more critical. These thorough assessments of the Antrim County data and the ASOG report demonstrate that virtually every one of the claims that President Trump and his surrogates made about the report was false. ASOG's inspection did not reveal any malicious software or algorithms or any other evidence that the voting machines had been compromised. In the ensuing days, most importantly, as Attorney General Barr had promised President Trump, within days of the release of the ASOG report, a full hand recount of every ballot cast in Antrim County confirmed the results reported by the machines and refuted ASOG's assertion that an algorithm has manipulated the vote count. Giuliani's chief investigator, Bernie Carrick, acknowledged that his team was not able to find any proof that a Dominion voting machine improperly switched, deleted, or injected votes during the 2020 election. President Trump was not swayed by these basic facts. The president continued to promote the ASOG report, hounding DOJ to investigate the matter further. He returned to ASOG's claims during a December 27th call with Acting Attorney General Rosen. And Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue, citing the report's claimed error rate of 68% in Antrim County. Donahue pointed out to the president that the difference between the computer and hand count was only one vote and that he cannot and should not be relying on ASOG's fraudulent claim because it simply was not true. President Trump's fixation on Dominion's voting machines and the baseless theory that the machines had manipulated votes led to a concerted effort to gain access to voting machines in states where President Trump was claiming election fraud. On the evening of December 18th, Powell, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and Patrick Byrne met with the president at the White House. Over several hours, they argued that the president had the authority under a 2018 executive order to seize voting machines. Several administration officials joined the meeting and forcefully rejected this extreme proposal. Multiple lawyers in the White House, including Eric Hirschman, Derek Lyons, and White House counsel Pat Cipollone, pushed back strongly against the idea of seizing voting machines. Cipollone told the Select Committee it was a horrible idea which had no legal basis. He emphasized that he had seen no evidence of massive fraud in the election. White House advisor Eric Hirschman similarly told the Select Committee that he never saw any evidence whatsoever to sustain the allegations against Dominion. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien phoned into the December 18th meeting and was asked if he had seen any evidence of election fraud in the voting machines or foreign interference in our voting machines. O'Brien responded that his team had looked into that and there's no evidence of that. Around the same time, President Trump, Mark Meadows, and Rudy Giuliani were repeatedly asking the leadership of DHS whether the agency had authority to seize voting machines, and they were repeatedly told that DHS has no such unilateral authority. Giuliani and Powell were also engaged in efforts to access voting machines in multiple states with the assistance of sympathetic local election officials. Those efforts turned up no evidence of any vote manipulation by any Dominion machine, but President Trump continued to press this bogus claim. On January 2, 2021, President Trump had a lengthy phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Alleging that they were at the heart of a conspiracy against him. Raffensperger was incredulous. "I don't believe that you're really questioning the Dominion machines," Raffensperger said, "because we did a hand retally, 100% retally of all the ballots and compared them to what the machines said and came up with virtually the same result. Then we did the recount and we got virtually the same result. In other words, the story in Georgia was the same as the story in Antrim County, Michigan. Officials performed a hand recount to put to rest any allegations that Dominion's machines had manipulated the vote. But once again, President Trump consciously disregarded these basic facts and persisted with his lies. During a January 4th, 2021 speech in Dalton, Georgia, President Trump chose to ignore Secretary Raffensperger's straightforward observations. The president rhetorically attacked Dominion once again, claiming that a crime had been committed in this state. It was immeasurable. The president called for an immediate forensic audit of all appropriate sampling of Dominion's voting machines and related equipment. His allegations were both false and nonsensical. Georgia had already performed a statewide hand recount of all ballots. President Trump and his allies have never provided any evidence showing that Dominion's voting software altered votes in the 2020 presidential election. In fact, some of the most vocal proponents of the Dominion claims harbored their own misgivings about the claims they were making in public. For example, Rudy Giuliani repeatedly, claimed in public that Dominion voting machines stole the election and that foreign countries had interfered in the election, but the evidence uncovered by the Select Committee reveals that he did not believe either of those things to be true. Giuliani testified that he did not believe that voting machines stole the election. He also acknowledged that he had seen no evidence that foreign countries had interfered in the election or manipulated the votes. This testimony is consistent with his lead investigator Bernie Kerrick's acknowledgement that he had not come across proof that voting machines were used to switch, delete, or inject votes improperly. Christina Bobb, an attorney who worked with Giuliani, similarly could not point to any evidence of wrongdoing by Dominion. Even Sidney Powell, perhaps the most committed proponent of the Dominion falsehoods, was unable to provide the Select Committee with any evidence or expert report that demonstrated that the 2020 election outcome in any state had been altered through manipulation of voting machines. This testimony is consistent. No, we did that. And Powell defended herself in a defamation suit brought by Dominion by claiming that no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Fucking me. No reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Man, I was paying attention, but I don't remember her saying that. Yeah. That's nuts. By January 6th, 2021, President Trump's claims regarding Dominion had been debunked time and time again. The president knew, or should have known, that he had no basis for alleging that Dominion's voting machines had cost him the election. The State Farm Arena video. President Trump also recklessly promoted allegations that video footage from a ballot counting center in Fulton County, Georgia, was proof of major election fraud. He was repeatedly informed that these allegations were false, but he pressed them anyway. On December 3rd, Rudy Giuliani presented state legislators with selectively edited footage of ballots being counted on election night at Fulton County's State Farm Arena. Giuliani misrepresented the video as a smoking gun proving election fraud. The president repeatedly claimed that he would have won Georgia if not for a supposed conspiracy that unfolded on election night. President Trump and some of his supporters alleged that political operatives faked a water main. President Trump and his supporters alleged that political operatives faked a water main rupture to expel Republican poll watchers. These same operatives then supposedly took illegal ballots from suitcases hidden under tables and added those ballots to the official count multiple times over by scanning them more than once. Not one of these allegations was true. Rudy Giuliani. That political operatives faked a water main rupture to expel Republican poll watchers, then reopened then took illegal ballots from suitcases hidden under the tables. None of this was true. In a speech on December 3rd, President Trump made the false claim about the State Farm Arena and claimed that if you just take the crime of what those Democrat workers were doing, that's 10 times more than I need to win this state. During a December 22nd speech, he played the same deceptive footage presented by Giuliani several weeks earlier. President Trump also repeatedly scapegoated one of these Fulton County, Georgia election workers during his January 2nd phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State, repeatedly referencing her by name and calling her a professional vote scammer and a hustler. It was a malicious smear. December 22nd. President Trump was directly notified at least 4 different times that the allegations he was making were false. On December 15th, then Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen told him it wasn't a suitcase, it was a bin. That's what they use when they're counting ballots. It's benign. His own people. Rosen's deputy, Richard Donahue, also debunked this claim, including on a phone call on December 27th and in a meeting in the Oval Office on December 31st. I told the president myself several times in several conversations that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we had looked at it, we had looked at the video, we had interviewed the witnesses, and it was not true. Likewise, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger told President Trump that his allegations about the video were false. During his January 2nd call with the president, Raffensperger explained that Giuliani's team sliced and diced that video and took it out of context, and that the events that transpired are nowhere near what was projected. Once one looks at more complete footage, nowhere near what was projected once one looks at more complete footage. Raffensperger also explained to the president that his team did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. Yet when Raffensperger said he would send President Trump a link to the television segment, the president refused. I don't care about the link. I don't need it. The actual evidence contradicted all of President Trump's claims about what the Fulton County video depicted. For example, the chief investigator from Raffensperger's office explained in a December 6th court filing that there were no mystery ballots that were brought in from an unknown location and hidden under tables. As the investigator noted, the security footage showed there was nothing under the table when it was brought into the room. Hours later, with reporters and observers present, the video shows ballots that had already been opened but not counted placed in the boxes, sealed up, and stored under the table. This finding was affirmed by the FBI, DOJ, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which interviewed witnesses and reviewed the full video footage and machine data from this site. There's just so much. There's just so much. So much from top to bottom. That if this was true, so many people had to not leak anything. The ballots in question were not double counted. This was confirmed by a full hand recount in November, as well as a subsequent review by investigators. They found that although one of the workers was shown in the video scanning certain batches multiple times, this was for a valid reason. Her scanner kept jamming. I didn't know ballot scanners could jam. It's just funny they would use that word jam. The investigators confirmed from scanner logs, as well as the footage, that she only hit the accept button once per batch. Investigators also found that the staff likely did not tell the observers to leave, let alone forcefully eject them from the facility. Despite this conclusive evidence and testimony, President Trump continued to point to the Fulton County video as evidence of a grand conspiracy. On January 5th, for instance, President Trump's executive assistant emailed a document from POTUS to Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Ted Cruz, Representative Jim Jordan, that cited Suitcase Gate among the worst fraud incidents in Georgia. During his Jan 6 speech, President Trump told the crowd that in Fulton County, Republican poll watchers were ejected, in some cases physically, from the room under the false pretense of a pipe burst. The president continued, "Then election officials pull boxes, Democrats, and suitcases of ballots out from under a table. You all saw it on television, totally fraudulent, and illegally scanned them for nearly 2 hours, totally unsupervised. Tens of thousands of votes. This act coincided with a mysterious vote dump of up to 100,000 votes for Joe Biden, almost none for Donald Trump." No part of the president's story was true. He had already been informed that it was false. In June 2021, hold on. No part of President Trump's story was true. He had already been informed it was false. In June 2021, when Giuliani's law license was revoked by a New York State appellate court. Oh, yeah, June 2021. The court's ruling cited his statements about supposed suitcases of ballots in Georgia as one of the reasons for doing so. If, as a respondent claims, he reviewed the entire video, he could not have reasonably reached a conclusion that illegal votes were being counted, the court's ruling reads. President Trump's conspiracy mongering endangered innocent public servants around the country, including in Fulton County. For example, during a December 10, 2020 appearance in Georgia, Giuliani falsely accused Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, two black public servants shown in the Fulton County video, of surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. In fact, Moss had been given a ginger mint by her mother, Freeman. As described in Chapter 2, baseless accusations like these forever changed the lives of election workers like Freeman and Moss, all in service of President Trump's big lie. Fake ballot myth. Wait, is that another case study? I thought there was 2 case studies. $1.8. Oh, we're almost at the speech. The fake ballot myth. The Trump campaign's distortion of the State Farm Arena video is just one example of the fake ballots lie. President Trump frequently claimed that fake ballots for Biden were injected into the vote counting process. To hear the president tell it, there were truckloads of ballots delivered in the middle of the night to vote counting centers, and millions more votes were cast than there were registered voters. Judges, Trump administration officials, state authorities, and independent election experts found each iteration of the fake ballot claim to be just that, fake. The Trump campaign and its surrogates brought 9 cases that raised some version of a fake ballot's claim. Every one of those cases was promptly dismissed. For example, in Constantino versus City of Detroit, a Michigan court ruled that the plaintiff's claims regarding forged, backdated, and double-counted votes in Detroit were incorrect and not credible, and rife with speculation and guesswork about sinister motives. Many of the fake ballot claims were publicly raised and repeated by President Trump, but never included any lawsuit. For example, a truck driver for the U.S. Postal Service claimed that he delivered hundreds of thousands of completed ballots from Bethpage, New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. President Trump repeated this allegation numerous times. The DOJ and FBI interviewed the relevant witnesses, including the truck driver, and reviewed the loading manifests. They determined that the allegation was not true. Both Attorney General Barr and his successor Jeffrey Rosen told President Trump this claim was false, but that didn't stop the president from repeating it. Um, Another alleged truckload of ballots was supposedly delivered to the Detroit Counting Center at 4:30 a.m. on election night. This truck allegedly carried 100,000 ballots in garbage cans, waste paper bins, cardboard boxes, and shopping baskets. A widely circulated video purportedly showed an unmarked van dropping off ballots, which were then wheeled into the counting center on a wagon. In fact, the only ballot delivery in Detroit after midnight on election night was an official delivery of 16,000 ballots stacked in 45 well-organized trays of approximately 350 ballots each. The wagon depicted in the video contained camera equipment being pulled by a reporter. The claim of 100,000 fake ballots being smuggled into the counting center in the middle of the night is even more ridiculous in light of the fact that only 174,384 absent voter ballots were recorded in the city of Detroit in the 2020 election. The addition of 100,000 fake ballots to approximately 74,000 legitimate ballots would certainly have been obvious to election officials. President Trump also repeatedly claimed that more votes were cast than there were registered voters in certain states, cities, or precincts. It was easy to fact-check these allegations and demonstrate they were false. For example, in Pennsylvania, approximately 9 million people were registered to vote, and approximately 6.8 million votes were cast in the 2020 election. Nevertheless, Trump and his allies made numerous more votes than voters claims in Pennsylvania. Citing 2020 mail-in voting data tweeted by Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano, the president claimed that 1.1 million ballots had been created and counted improperly. In fact, there was no discrepancy in the actual numbers. Mastriano erroneously compared the 2.6 million mail-in ballots cast in the November general election to the 1.5 million ballots that were returned in the June primary election. President Trump also promoted a false claim by a different Pennsylvania legislator that Pennsylvania had 205,000 more votes than voters. This claim was based on a flawed comparison by State Representative Frank Ryan of the votes recorded by state election authorities as having been cast and those reflected in a separate state registry. In fact, the discrepancy was a result of some counties not yet uploading their official results to the registry. In late December 2020, acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue told President Trump that his allegation was baseless. President Trump kept repeating it anyway. The president and his surrogates made similar false claims concerning excess votes in Michigan. Many of these claims originated with a grossly inaccurate affidavit submitted by Russell Ramsland, the person behind the very amateurish and false and misleading ASOG report regarding Dominion voting machines in Antrim County. Ramsland claimed in a similar affidavit filed in federal court in Georgia that 3276 precincts in Michigan had turnout between 84 and 350%, with 19 precincts reporting turnout in excess of 100%. Ramsland's affidavit was widely ridiculed, in part because he relied on data for dozens of precincts that are located in Minnesota, not Michigan. Even after he corrected his affidavit to remove the Minnesota townships, his Michigan data remained wildly off base. Multiple counting of ballots fiction. The president and his surrogates repeatedly claimed that ballots for former Vice President Biden were counted multiple times. These claims originated when some noticed election officials rerunning stacks of ballots through counting machines. But the allegation is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the vote counting process. It is routine and appropriate for election officials to rescan ballots if they are not properly scanned and tabulated in the initial effort. In Constantino versus City of Detroit, the court rejected the incorrect and not credible affidavits speculating that ballots were run through scanners and counted multiple times in favor of the more accurate and persuasive explanation of activity put forward by the highly respected election official with 40 years of experience. As with other misguided claims of fraud, election fraud, the claims that ballots were counted multiple times disregards the safeguards in the voting process. In particular, as noted above, it would certainly have been apparent in the canvassing process if hundreds of ballots were counted multiple times in Detroit because the total number of ballots would greatly exceed the number of voters who voted. But that was not the case. The imaginary dead and ineligible voters. In addition to their false claims regarding fake ballots, President Trump and his surrogates also relentlessly asserted that tens of thousands of ballots were cast by dead or otherwise ineligible voters. For example, President Trump and Giuliani frequently alleged that more than 66,000 unregistered juveniles voted in Georgia. In fact, no underage people voted in Georgia. Giuliani offered several different made-up figures of the number of non-citizens who supposedly voted in Arizona, but provided no evidence to substantiate his claims. In fact, Arizona requires every new voter to provide proof of citizenship in order to register to vote, or to complete a federal voter registration form that requires the individual to sign an attestation to citizenship status under penalty of perjury, and no person can vote without being registered. By mid-November, Trump campaign staff determined this allegation that thousands of non-citizens voted in Arizona was based on highly unreliable information, and it is one of the false claims that led Giuliani to losing his New York law license. These ineligible voters did not exist. Nor were thousands of votes cast in the names of dead Americans. During his January 2nd call with Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger, the president claimed that close to about 5,000 dead voters cast ballots in the election. Raffensperger quickly informed the president this wasn't true, but the dead voter lie wasn't limited to Georgia. During his Jan 2nd call, the dead voter lie was not limited to Georgia. President Trump wanted Americans to believe that dead voters contributed to his defeat in several battleground states. But even the Trump campaign and its lawyers recognized early on that the claims regarding dead voters were grossly exaggerated, to say the least. By early November, Trump lawyers discovered that many people listed by the campaign as having died were actually alive and well. In early December, Eric Hirschman advised Chief of Staff Meadows by text message that the Trump legal team had determined that the claim of more than 10,000 dead people voting in Georgia was not accurate. The ensuing exchange makes clear that both men knew that Giuliani's claims were absurd. Hirschman. Just an FYI, Alex Cannon and his team verified that the 10,000 supposed dead people voting in Georgia is not accurate. Meadows. I didn't hear that claim. It is not accurate. I think I found 22 if I remember correctly. 2 of them died just days before the general. Hirschman. It was alleged in Rudy's hearing today. Your number is much closer to what we can prove. I think it's 12. Meadows. My son found 12 obituaries and 6 other possibles, depending on the voter roll accuracy. Hirschman. That sounds more like it. Maybe he can help Rudy find the other 10K? Meadows. LOL. Shortly thereafter, a Georgia court dismissed the claim that there were tens of thousands of votes cast by ineligible voters, noting the claims rest on speculation rather than duly pled facts. The Trump campaign's own expert on the supposed dead voters admitted that the campaign lacked the necessary data to make any conclusions about whether any or how many votes were cast in the name of a deceased person. State officials did have such data, however, and were able to conduct the type of matching analysis required. These state authorities determined that there were only a handful of such cases in which people voted on behalf of deceased individuals. Even in those cases where the person who voted actually did die, President Trump's lawyers knew that the vast majority of the voters included on their list of dead voters actually cast their votes before they passed. In early January 2021, just days before January 6th, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham asked several Trump lawyers to provide evidence to support the campaign's claims regarding dead voters. As Giuliani's team investigated, they concluded that they could not find evidence of dead voters anywhere near the number that Giuliani and President Trump were claiming publicly. After noting the shortcomings in their evidence, Catherine Freese, a lawyer working with the Giuliani legal team, warned that Senator Graham would push back on their evidence. As predicted by Freese, Senator Graham was not impressed by the information provided by Giuliani's team. In his speech on the Senate floor on January 6th, Graham explained why he would not object to the certification of electoral votes. Senator Graham referred to the failure of the Trump attorneys to provide the evidence he requested. They said there's 66,000 people in Georgia under 18 that voted. How many people believe that? I asked, give me 10. Hadn't had one. They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voted. Give me 10. He hasn't gotten one. Doesn't that say there's problems in every election? Or does that say there's problems in every election? I don't buy this. Enough is enough. We've got to end it. Documents obtained by the Select Committee reveal that President Trump and his lawyers knew that the claims being made in court about dead or ineligible voters in Georgia were inaccurate, and the lawyers were concerned that if the president vouched for those claims in another court pleading, he might be criminally prosecuted. Huh. On December 31st, as the lawyers pushed to file a federal lawsuit in Georgia, some of the lawyers raised concerns about the president signing a verification under oath that the allegations regarding voter fraud in Georgia, including claims regarding dead people voting, were true, as Eastman noted in an email to his colleagues on December 31st. Although the president signed a verification regarding the Georgia claims back on December 1st, he has since been made aware that some of the allegations and evidence preferred by the experts has been inaccurate. For him to sign a new verification with that knowledge would not be accurate, and I have no doubt that an aggressive DA or U.S. attorney someplace will go after both the president and his lawyers once all the dust settles on this. Despite these concerns, President Trump and his attorneys filed a complaint that incorporated the same inaccurate numbers, and President Trump signed a verification swearing under oath that the inaccurate numbers were true and correct, or believed to be true and correct, to the best of his knowledge and belief. A federal judge reviewing the relevant emails and pleadings recently concluded that the emails show that President Trump knew that the specific number of voter fraud were wrong, but continued to tout those numbers both in court and to the public. The court finds that these emails are sufficiently related to and in furtherance of a conspiracy to defraud the United States. Wow. No shit. The court finds that these emails are sufficiently related to and in furtherance of a conspiracy to defraud the United States. That's a conspiracy by Trump and his team to defraud the United States, just to be clear. All right, the meat. The meat. Oh, wait a minute. This is the end of the narrative section. Okay. At noon on January 6th, 2021, President Trump addressed thousands of his supporters at a rally just south of the White House. The election had been decided 2 months earlier. The courts found that there was no evidence of significant fraud. The states certified their votes by mid-December. It was over. President Trump lost. But that's not what the president told those in attendance. He delivered an incendiary speech from beginning to end, arguing that nothing less than the fate of America was at stake. Our country has had enough, President Trump said. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. He claimed that his followers had descended on Washington to save our democracy and stop the steal. He refused once again to concede, and he proclaimed that today I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. For months, President Trump had relentlessly promoted his big lie. He and his associates manufactured one tale after another to justify it. For more than an hour on January 6th, the president wove these conspiracy theories and lies together. But by the Select Committee's assessment, there were more than 100 times during his speech in which President Trump falsely claimed that either the election had been stolen from him or falsely claimed that votes had been compromised by some specific act of fraud or major procedural violations. That day, President Trump repeated many of the same lies he had told for months, even after being informed that many of these claims were false. He lied about Dominion voting machines in Michigan, suitcases of ballots in Georgia, more votes than voters in Pennsylvania, votes cast by non-citizens in Arizona, and dozens of other false claims of election fraud. None of those claims were true. As explained in the chapters that follow, the big lie was central to President Trump's plan to stay in power. He used the big lie to pressure state and local officials to undo the will of the people. His campaign convened fake electors on the baseless pretense that former President Biden won several states due to fraud or other malfeasance. The president tried to subvert the Department of Justice by browbeating its leadership to endorse his election lies. And when the DOJ's senior personnel did not acquiesce, President Trump sought to install a loyalist who would. When all those efforts failed, President Trump betrayed his own vice president. He pressured Vice President Pence to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6th, falsely claiming that he had the power to refuse to count certain electoral votes. President Trump knew that this was illegal, but attempted to justify it with lies about the election. On December 19th, 2020, President Trump summoned a mob to Washington, D.C., the same day that Congress was set to certify former Vice President Biden's victory by claiming the election was stolen and promising a wild protest. And the bogus stolen election claim was the focus of President Trump's speech on January 6th. The litany of lies he told riled up a mob that would march to the U.S. Capitol to intimidate Vice President Pence and members of Congress. And we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, he told the crowd. He incited them with these words just after praising his own election night lie, the big lie. President Trump told his followers to fight to save their country from a bogus specter of supposed election fraud. And many of them did. Transcript of the January 6th speech. We're not reading it all. We're just going to copy it so we can read it later. Chapter 1, The Big Lie. That's what we just read. Chapter 2. Oh, it's continued. Okay. I just want to find 11,780 votes. The Electoral College and President Trump's attempt to subvert it. The plan emerges. Outreach and implementation of the plan. Okay, this is all important. Fake electors. And the President of the Senate strategy. Just call it corrupt and leave the rest to me. A coup in search of a legal theory. Be there, will be wild. 187 minutes of dereliction. Okay, I'm not sure I can take notes on all of this. This is going to take me months to read through taking notes like this. I might just read. Try to summarize a main idea of every subchapter. Yeah, because we got to continue. It's all important. It's all important. It's all part of the plan. Can I not download this? Ask me what I want to do each download. Hmm. Oh. That big file. Yeah, there's the save button. Go. One 163. All right, good night. See you tomorrow.